thank you so much for coming along today. We're excited to have a in-depth discussion about the Post on Behalf of feature, which I know was recently, or in July, was released for Yammer networks, and of course for workplace networks as well. There's a draft war feature available, which I think a lot of the discussion today will definitely apply to that as well. We've brought some experts along as well who have some thoughts and ideas about these features as well, which I think will be very useful if you do decide to use some of these features or look into some of these features moving ahead. And we also have a jam-packed agenda as well. But before we get into the content of today's session, I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which this online session is being hosted, and the traditional custodians of the lands where participants are located as well. I would like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future, and also extend that respect to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are present on today's session. Now, just to give you a quick overview of the agenda and what we're looking to cover today, I'll quickly just give you some very quick introductions, and then we'll be handing over to Laurie, who's going to quickly chat through why leadership engagement is so important. And I think a lot of these conversations also led to a lot of customers requesting this type of feature, Post on Behalf of, but we also want to focus in on authentic leadership today as well across enterprise social, which is definitely where our panel discussion with the experts will come into play, and we'll hear from them in just a moment. I'm going to quickly talk about as well how you can potentially measure Post on Behalf of. It is something that we see being an option potentially in SWOOP in the future, so I'll give you a quick update on that. We'll have a bit of a wrap up and a summary as well on some of the key things to consider and top tips if you do decide to use these. And then please, especially throughout this session, we love to encourage conversation. So if you want to engage in the chat, or if at any point you'd love to even potentially jump in and share and ask a question, we'll facilitate all of that through the chat. So please use that there to add any thoughts or questions that pop up throughout as well. We have a fantastic range of presenters here today. We have Rebecca and Simon, who are Microsoft MVPs, and I think are definitely, the experts in this space around collaboration, digital adoption. So we are super stoked to have them here today to discuss Post on Behalf of. We also have Dr. Lawrence Lockley from SWOOP Analytics, who is our co-founder and chief data scientist. As I mentioned, Laurie will be talking to some of those stats around leadership engagement and why it is so important for leaders to be maybe more authentically engaged on these platforms. And of course, we also have Sharon here from SWOOP, who's our Director of External Relations and Communications. And Sharon's going to facilitate some of the conversations we're having around Post on Behalf of today. And I'm Emily, and I lead all of the custom success activities for SWOOP Analytics in the APAC region. And I'm super happy to be here hosting today's session. So what we're going to do first, and I'll ask you to open up the chat just to help engage here at the moment, and also so we can get a sense of what your thoughts might be around some of these features and leadership engagement, and even potentially writing posts on behalf of leaders. So first of all, I'd love for you to share, I think this is probably just a simple yes or no question that I'd like to get you to share in the chat. We have, do you draft content on behalf of leaders in your organisation? And this is a safe space. Feel free to be honest about it. It's completely okay. But I'm sure we'll give you some things to think about. We've got a lot of yeses. We've got a handful of no's. I think there might be a bit of balance, but I'd say across the board, what we hear from customers is that drafting content for leaders is just a part of the process, really. And this new Post on Behalf of feature is something that's kind of helping to enable that process. For some, I know it's a hard no, and authentic leadership is definitely a big focus on the overall strategy for Yammer and Workplace, which is great to hear. Today, I'm hoping we'll give you a few things to think about. We called the webinar Post on Behalf of Tread with Caution. So there's definitely some points that we'd like you to consider moving ahead. And just one other question as well. Are you currently using post on behalf of or draft for? I know for Yammer, it's still a relatively new feature. It's been around on Workplace since last year. It looks like maybe potentially people haven't had a chance to play around with it yet. Maybe you didn't realize it existed and maybe we've drawn this to your attention. It looks like a lot of people haven't been using it, even potentially blocking the feature altogether, which we're seeing in the chat here. And yeah, otherwise, I'm sure today will be a super informative session in saying that, and thank you for answering those questions and engaging. I'm going to hand over to Laurie now just to talk through some of the overall stats about leadership engagement and why it is so important.
Emily, can I just butt in? I don't think you're screen sharing. Can everyone see the full screen? I can just see Emily's in a little box rather than a full screen share.
I can see
I've got the screen.
I can see it.
Oh, okay. It just must be my team.
Oh,
Sorry.
all good. No worries. Thanks, Sharon, and over to you, Laurie.
Okay, thanks, Emily. So, basically from day one, sort of SWOOP has been popular in benchmarking leaders, in fact, and how leaders are engaging staff through Yammer. It wasn't something necessarily we designed, but our personas sort of became very attractive to our very first customer, who was Westpac, back in, I think, 2015, and they wanted to create an executive dashboard for their CEO in his office, showing how they are performing as in their personas on SWOOP. Now that led us to thinking a lot harder about, well, what is the real impact of a leader on staff? And we all sort of anecdotally knew that they would build participation, but what were the numbers? So we did. It was the study's a few years old now, but we had a great data, and it wasn't Westpac, I might add. It was another big Australian organisation. We had a great data set which had postings and impacts from their full leadership team, including the CEO. So we were able to do quite a detailed analysis of what was the impact on an individual getting a response, a like or a reply from the CEO or from a senior leadership member. And I think there was about 25 in that group. And we found that sort of on average, there was an increase of like 146% on their interactions after they'd what we call blessed by a senior executive in a post. And that included not just more activity, but actually going in and reaching out to more people. In other words, building a bigger network. So in essence, what we have is the numbers that show what the quantitative impact of a leader responding to a post from a staff member, and of course we've got lots of anecdotal sort of response as well from staff members and people we knew who worked in there that said, I never expected the CEO to reply to my post. I just stuck it in there, and of course that energized me now, so I'm in there a lot more now. So in essence, that's really all I wanted to talk about in terms of the authentic leadership. Now, I guess the big question is, if that response had come from something that you weren't sure was the actual leader, or it might have been written by a corporate comms person, would you be similarly energized to be more active and reach out more in Yammer? So let me just leave that out there as an open question as we move through this session. Back to you, Emily.
Thanks, Laurie. I'm actually we'll move into the sort of panel discussion part here. Laurie, I might invite you to be a part of the discussion on this as well. And of course, we have Rebecca here, but I'm going to hand over to Sharon to help facilitate some of this.
Thanks, Emily. Simon, are you on the call? I haven't seen your name pop up. Maybe not.
Sure.
Oh. Anyway, well, that's okay. Rebecca and Laurie, I'll ask you guys instead. So, Rebecca, it's interesting. Laurie's just talking about then the authenticity of leaders posting. So, given that, when would it be appropriate to actually use the post on behalf of feature or the post for feature on Workplace?
I'm not as familiar with Workplace. I'm much more familiar with Yammer, so I'm not sure exactly how the feature functions in workplace. But what I do know about the Yammer feature is it doesn't actually tell you that it's a post on behalf of, which I personally don't like. You know, in email, you do have the option to kind of send on behalf of, and it's clear then that, you know, an executive assistant or someone else is sent it on behalf of a leader. So there's that transparency there. So I'm extremely hesitant about the feature. I think that you don't have the ability to kind of highlight that it's a post on behalf of. Creates a big challenge around authenticity, because then if you're not sure, you kind of, I feel as a consumer, questioning everything, and then the trust dissipates there.
Yeah, the trust is a big factor, I think, is that if you are posting on behalf of somebody else and you don't know whether it is that person, I mean, surely that's got to, well, I would imagine that would affect the trust. Have you found that is an issue?
Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate. You at SWOOP know I worked at NextDC for a number of years, and we were huge users of Yammer, and that was heavily driven by the CEO, Craig Scroggie, who's still the CEO there. I've since moved on to a different role, but people just love to hear from Craig. And when I started in that role, it made the internal comms person in me quite nervous, because Craig would, you know, write a post on his phone and bash it out onto Yammer, unfiltered, no kind of processes or checks or anything, and it would just be out there. And that was frightening to me from an internal comms perspective, but also so exciting and delightful, because he was doing it himself. He was proving that an executive doesn't need someone to do their writing for them. It doesn't need to be tailored. And also, the business really responded. People wanted to hear from Craig. They wanted to be able to ask him questions, and they did that, and he invited that, and it was incredibly successful in that organisation.
So when you are posting on behalf of a leader, you know, so much of the stories that we've shared in case studies and things is it's not only about the post, but the responses and the replies from those leaders, the leaders listening in. So I mean, when you're using post on behalf of, and I think it's the same for draft for workplace, you literally cannot tell if it's done by the leader or somebody else. So again, when you're coming to replies, we know how important leaders listening in on conversations are. Again, is that somewhere where you need to tread with caution?
I think so, particularly. Absolutely, I've written posts for leaders. I'll put it out there. It's part of the job as an internal comms person. I'll always write a post and try and do a tone of voice that I think is relative to that person's natural way of writing from my experience. And I will always ask them to read it and to tune it. You know, if I use a particular word that they wouldn't use or a sign off that they wouldn't use, like for them to tune it to the natural tone of voice. What's interesting about post on behalf of is if it's written by someone else and it hasn't been vetted or tuned, and the tone of voice doesn't match then the conversation, people pick up on that sort of thing. People get a sense for it. And even if they don't get a sense for it, that sort of stuff gets around in an organization. If you know that it's not really them posting it and it's just the comms team managing it, well, what's the value? Who are you actually having a conversation with?
It'd be great if anyone could mention in the comments, if you have used post on behalf of for posting for a leader, do you then do the replies, or does the leader do the replies? It'd just be interesting to sort of run a little poll, I guess, on the side here and hear that. Laurie, what do you think about that side of it? Are people putting the trust at risk by posting on behalf of a leader?
Well, you know, we're preparing this sort of the Yammer 2021 right now, you and I, and the more I'm reading and hearing about the importance of trust and trust in the organisation, you know, employee experience being centred on trust in the organisation, I can only think that it's a huge risk if you get that thing wrong. And my suggestion at one point was at least tag it so people know it doesn't come directly from the CEO. It might be a message endorsed by a senior leader, but you know, like that authenticity thing and trust is, as they say, you know, it can take years to build trust, but you can lose it in seconds. and you know, a message that people feel is inauthentic, despite the intent. You know, you can just destroy, you know, years of trust building. So I think it's a ticking bomb, frankly. But you know, when we trialed it, it was sort of like you couldn't tell. You know, you could, you know, it was sort of like. And what does that do? What happens if people start handing around their authorities to post on behalf of? You know, then you've got a whole social network of bots virtually. You know, so is that what we want? You know, so you know, but yeah, we do have to be respectful of the fact that Microsoft are only responding to the voice of the customer, right? So people are asking for this. You know, I've seen, you know, I put this in the category of private channels in Teams. You know, it's sort of, I personally think it's a dumb idea, but you know, it's number one on the voice of the customer. So we can't be critical of Microsoft for reacting to that, because we want to react to the customers. So I don't know, Rebecca, you know, would you have put that request in? Or obviously people have. So should Microsoft be reading those things differently? Should they be applying some judgment or just doing the most?
Judgment's an interesting one. I think, like you, I can't fault them for responding to the customer, and I feel I know the sort of customer that they're responding to, because the repositioning of Yammer in the past few years, they've definitely come to the party from an internal comms and community management perspective, which was something that people like myself who've been using Yammer for a long time have really wanted. I never wanted POBO. I'll be absolutely clear about that. What I'm disappointed about with that feature is the lack of control that is available, and how difficult it is to switch it off, that it's just open to anyone to be able to take advantage of as well. In the current configuration options, I, as a nobody in the business, could let somebody else post on behalf of me, and that would just happen and nobody would know the difference. The likelihood of that happening is low, but still it seems strange to me that a feature like that would go in without control. But I've also been in the position, in the really early Yammer days, of having an executive assistant come up to me and say, can you set me up so that I can do posts on behalf of the managing director, and having to talk them through that they couldn't do that unless they wanted to breach the very stringent rules about who you can log in behalf of and all that sort of stuff that are standard with IT. But he wanted to be on Yammer. He just didn't want to do the writing, because that was the type of leader that he was, and much more common at that time as well.
Wow. There's a few questions coming through. One from Laura. It's a good question. Does Yammer allow the person to review the post before it goes live? The answer is no. On Workplace, the draft goes to the person to review, edit as they wish, and it's then up to them to post. Interested to know the difference. So how it works with Yammer, Laura, is once you get approval to post on behalf of somebody, there's no way of telling whether it's done by that person or done by someone who's posting on behalf of them. So yeah, that's a much... would you agree, Rebecca, that the Workplace feature, that the draft goes to the person to review and edit it, may be a more trustworthy, perhaps, way to go?
That's the sort of workflow that I would expect for a tool like this, the purpose of which you would think is for executive leaders and internal communications teams to leverage and be more present. With Yammer, I haven't played with it myself in a current environment, but I remember reading that I think it sends a notification if someone posts on behalf of you and you've given them permission to. I think you get a notification so you know that they've done it, but it's a after the fact, not a approval process.
Yeah. And Laurie, here's a question from Linda. What's your advice around having personas? Example, dedicated profile for internal comms to address matters which brings about some kind of authorised voice, and then leaders can respond and post for their own posts that are more targeted or personal from them. It's a really good question, Linda.
So I'm not sure that I fully understand that. So is that sort of saying dividing your employee base up into persona types and then reacting to those like a...
I think I know what Linda's saying. I think she's talking about, because I've seen some organisations do this where they have like a generic profile And some places have done a really lovely job of it, where they have this profile that is set up that is this is internal comms, or this is corporate comms, and they use that to do their official corporate comms communicating. I think that's where Linda's question is coming from.
I think Linda was just about to jump in. Is that what it was, Linda?
Yep, you've hit the nail on the head. That's what I meant. I just wonder if that would be a way to alleviate maybe the pressure on executives that don't always have the time. So there's still that voice of authority coming from, you know, an official corporate channel, or maybe even the office of the secretary, for example, as a persona. And then you're still letting people know that it is coming from authority, and leaders can jump in from their own, you know, point of view, and that adds to it. But maybe that takes some pressure off.
I guess the question I would have is how many of these posts are there that would, you know, I mean, obviously we would want the leaders to be posting quite a lot, just in a conversational way. I always thought this post on behalf of was sort of like, well, you know, if there's an important message that requires, you know, crafting, if you like, by the expert internal communicators, you know, they would do that, and you know, then and that could go out, you know, on behalf of the CEO even, and people would see it as a crafted message. But you know, a lot of the responses that people are wanting, I guess, from a leader is sort of like conversational responses that you know, they're short and sharp. And I know when we interviewed David Thodey, who was a real champion of Yammer at Telstra, and we asked him, we said, well, you know, you were the CEO, you know, and you actually made 500 replies in the last 4 months. You know, we actually had the data. We said, well, you know, how did you keep up with that? You know, you can't have been reading Yammer all day. And he says, well, I really cheated a little bit. He said, I have this department over here called the social whatever, and they just tell me which things I should be interested in. And that's how I did it. I just said, they just fed me what I should be interested in. I wrote all my own posts, he said. I responded authentically, and in fact, if people were complaining about somebody else, another executive or another department, I didn't tell them to fix it. I just did the same for them. I said, you might be interested in this little discussion over here about, you know, the leave system or something like that. You know, so he was more or less, he was very clever in introducing that whole social interaction sort of behaviour into how he dealt with the staff. And he really did say he wanted people to view management as different to, you know, just those sitting up there sending out formal messages, but people they could engage with directly. And now this was back in 2016, so we're talking quite a while ago. It might have even been 2015. So my question is, well, you know, how many of these post on behalf messages are they really? Are they? And we talking like one a week, one a month, sort of, you know, 3 a day, you know, sort of. What do you think, Rebecca? I mean, as an internal comms person, how often do you think you would want to post on behalf of?
Well, I don't want people to do it at all. I really think, and I understand the practicalities of working in business. You know, I work within organisations. I'm not a consultant, so I get it. But I think it takes us away from the heart of what is great about enterprise social collaboration tools. And the example that you just gave is so awesome, because what he had to manage the volume and to find what was useful to him was a team of listening people. And that's what you've got in an enterprise social network, right? Is if you've got, depending on the size of your network, you know, 50 to thousands of people who are able to look at the stuff and tag you and let you know if it's something that's important, and let you know if it's something that you should weigh in on. Not to invalidate what Linda has put forward about having a dedicated profile, but that is that's an old school way of thinking to respond to the problem of enterprise social. So I wish we didn't have the feature at all. I understand why it's there, and I would always encourage anyone in discussion to go right back to the why, to think about the value that you're trying to get. And you know, if the answer is that you need to set up a process around having regular communications as a post on behalf of or via a generic account, that's cool, as long as it aligns with your strategy and you've got a plan, you've got a structure around it, and people can rely on it, and that it's transparent and authentic.
That's an excellent summary, Rebecca, of best practices. And I know there's been some other best practices shared in the chat too, so thank you for that. If anyone wants to keep this discussion going, we can stay on after the hour. We just don't want to hold you up for more so. So I'm going to go over to Emily, because Emily, you've got some news about measuring post on behalf of.
Yes, I do. Ever since this feature was announced, SWOOP has definitely been thinking about ways we could potentially measure this. And of course, we have some existing research that Laurie spoke to around the impact of leadership engagement. But we thought it would be interesting to measure the posts that are post on behalf of posts. We've realised that this is something that we can potentially measure, which is really exciting. So for those who are currently running with SWOOP, that would be a matter of being able to pinpoint the exact posts in your SWOOP dashboard which were post on behalf of versus the posts that were actually authentically shared by the leader themselves. And I think I can even, I can smell a whole nother research piece on this as well, in terms of comparing the engagement on post on behalf of versus those authentic posts and seeing if there is a really significant difference. And I know, maybe in some instances we don't give, general users of these platforms enough credit for being able to sniff out those perfectly crafted internal comms posts as well. So yeah, we're really keen to see what this will look like, and we'll definitely be keeping you posted in terms of timings when some insights around post on behalf of will be available, which is super exciting. And I also just wanted to make sure that we can kind of round up exactly what we've kind of spoken through in discussion. We know that people will be using these features as much as we sort of would always love to see authentic leadership at the forefront. There will be some instances where, a lot of our customers will be using this. So we did want to share a bit of a summary and a bit of a framework and things to consider before you do proceed, and definitely proceed with caution, of course. So we have 4 points here. First of all, ensure that you establish when using these particular features is appropriate on your network. Of course, we wouldn't expect for it to be used for every single post for a particular leader or for every single circumstance. So establish what those rules are for your organisation, and of course, stick with them. Also, and I know we had some conversation around this, ensure that your leader actually knows how to respond in the comments in real time. While you are actually allowed to respond on behalf of the leader as well as post, we think it's really important that the leaders actually understand how to, carry on that thread after that post is made on their behalf. So another consideration there, that they will need to be, they should be active within the thread moving ahead. We would definitely advise that you prioritise the coaching of leaders over, going straight to post on behalf of as the alternative. Again, for those people who are and users who are running with SWOOP at the moment, just think about the value of, maybe it's a 30-minute coaching session where you can sit down with a leader, show them their SWOOP persona. Are they currently an observer or a broadcaster? What are the 3 actions that they can do to become more engaged? Are they following that 1, 2, 3 rule? Are they asking questions? Are they a member of a few different communities? We would definitely advise that you start at that sort of coaching point as opposed to relying on post on behalf of as the first option. And then finally, don't rely on POBO for broadcasting. Make sure that you're definitely using it to drive some sort of quality conversation, which is just the final point there as well. Of course, please continue to drop any extra questions in the chat. I just have a few final things that I just thought I'd share with you while we have you here. We have some exciting developments from SWOOP coming up in the next few months. So for our Yammer customers, or for anyone interested in enterprise social more broadly, we have a super exciting Yammer benchmarking report for 2021 coming up for release in the next few months. We have a pre-registration link available, so if you want that report to land in your inbox as soon as it's released, definitely just fill in your details so you have access to that as soon as possible. So there's that. We've got a QR code. There's a link there. Otherwise, you can just head to our website and you'll definitely see some information on how to access the pre-registration. And then beyond that, we also have a big Yammer event coming up towards the end of the year. And this is the only Yammer dedicated event of the year as well. We're working in collaboration with Microsoft on this one. There's going to be a range of customer stories, customer interviews. Microsoft will be talking about the direction of Yammer and product roadmap moving ahead. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk about the benchmarking findings, talk about some of those top performers. For our APAC session, that one will be happening on the 9th of November in the morning. So please do jump onto our website as well and register to attend. There's also an option there to register as a speaker as well. So if you have an interesting story to share, we would love to hear from you, and you can potentially feature as a presenter on the event as well. And I know that brings us to the top of the hour, but if you would like to continue the conversation about post on behalf of, I'll be able to hang around, and I'm sure some of our presenters will be able to hang around to assist you with some of those as well. So beyond that, thank you to our presenters. Thank you, Rebecca, for coming along and sharing those insights. It was super valuable.